Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Vancouver Real. I'm your solo host today, Mike Zaremba, and actually, I'm going to be doing a little bit different thing today in terms of a pre-recorded intro for our guest. I wanted to maximize the time that we had on with Graham Hancock, so I didn't do any of this kind of stuff before I was on the call with him. I wanted to just get into it with him and leave this thing for afterwards. So this episode of Vancouver Real is actually brought to you by who made this interview possible. Graham Hancock has been on my bucket list to have on the show for a very long time. And, so a huge shout out to Salome, who is the organizer for the third annual Cannabis, Hemp Conference and Expo that's happening this year in Vancouver. It happens every year in Vancouver. It's the third annual one. This year it's at UBC at the Nest. So the Cannabis and Hemp Conference has brought Graham in to be a speaker this year. He's going to be speaking both May 6th and 7th at the event. Tickets are available now, early bird tickets that are. And for those of you who don't know, the Cannabis Hemp Conference and Expo is bringing together 50 international and national speakers, 30 exhibitions, 13 panel discussions, and 4 hands-on workshops. So it's a very overall encompassing event. It's going to be a lot happening. I've been to it the first year their event, and I know they've evolved a ton since that first year, including the venue change. And at the conference, you'll be able to hear about all the cutting-edge research on the medicinal benefits of cannabis, as well as the latest news on legalization, which we know is going to be happening here in our country sometime sooner than later. We don't really have an exact date yet, but that's coming down the pipe. This conference is geared towards patients, consumers, healthcare professionals, environmentalists, and industry experts. So I highly encourage you to come on down to this event. They are what made this podcast possible with Graham Hancock today. So a huge thank you to the Cannabis Hemp Conference and Expo happening this May 6th and 7th. You can get the early bird tickets at cannabishempconference.com. And go and check out the event page on Facebook as well. We are podcasting here with Graham out of Floathouse via Skype. So floathouse.ca is our website. And if you use the promo code Cannabis, you will save 20% off a single float as well. And so here at Vancouver Real, we are dedicated towards cultural evolution. And that is why we have partnered up with the Cannabis Hemp Conference and Expo this year to further propagate this sort of evolution that we need to kind of have within our society, within our culture, to have different discussions, to explore our own minds and our own consciousness. And I think Graham does such an amazing job of articulating this and why it's so important for us to be evolving as people, as a culture, and in essence taking back control, the sovereignty for our consciousness. And he's going to be doing a couple talks that day. One is going to be entitled "The End of the Inquisition: Cognitive Liberty, Adult Sovereignty, and Legalization of Cannabis." And then his second talk was going to be around negotiations with the Green Goddess, the highs and lows, the gifts and debits of this author's 30-year relationship with cannabis. And Graham does definitely touch on both of these within the podcast coming up. And I'm sure he has a lot more to share in the actual presentations he'll be delivering at the conference. And that's all I got to say for now. I don't want to drone on here, but I did want to do this introduction before I spoke with Graham on the air, because I wanted to just maximize the 1 hour of time that we are able to get from him while he is in the UK. And he will be coming to town. So folks, check him out. He's an amazing individual, one of the most important thought leaders of our time. Check out Graham Hancock live and in person at the Vancouver Cannabis Hemp Conference and Expo. And please enjoy his podcast right now.
Well, how can I even really start to summarize Graham Hancock in a little introduction? I was thinking about this last night, and I normally don't write introductions. However, for yourself and Gabor Mate, I needed to. I wanted to make sure I got everything in here. So, you're an internationally best-selling author, journalist. You've sold more than 7 million copies of your books worldwide, from The Sign and the Seal, Fingerprints of the Gods, which is one of your most famous books. Actually, I found it in our lounge here. I'm actually at Floathouse, which is our commercial float center here. And
Good to see fingerprints there.
Yeah, no, it's required reading for all floaters for sure. And Supernatural was actually the first book that turned me on to you. And I'm also going through your War God series right now, which is a fictional series that you have written. And then your most recent book is Magicians of the Gods, which is kind of a sequel to Fingerprints of the God, kind of furthering this evidence that you've been discovering for so long of these ancient civilizations. And I love how you pull this research and this evidence and you kind of mold and carve and craft your theories around these in a very, supportive manner and a very artistic manner as well. And I think for many of our listeners, myself included, the history that we learned in our schools were probably not, as substantiated as perhaps originally perceived. You're a tremendous environmentalist, a humanitarian, and you use your ever-increasing platform towards these notions and causes, and oftentimes experiencing resistance, what I would call the standard narrative of consciousness or a mainstream form of consciousness, which I personally see why you are one of the most important thought leaders of our time. I've been exposed to you through episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience, London Real, and I think this online tribe is really where I see you flourishing and just finding people that resonate with your messages.
I completely agree. Yeah. Online is where it's at. The old gatekeepers of the mainstream media who used to control everything, they're out of the picture now. They're still desperately trying to be in the picture, but they don't control anything anymore.
Yeah, and they tried with your TEDx talk, your original TEDx talk entitled "The War on Consciousness," which I can't tell you how many times I listened to that. I would listen to it as a motivating morning breakfast, ingestion for me to pump me up for my day with the work that I do at Float House to, promote this consciousness awareness expansion work. And anyways, Graham, that's really long-winded, but I'm really humbled, and that's going to be overshadowed by my excitement to have you sitting down with me across the pond. Welcome officially to Vancouver Real.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Excellent. So I have to give a huge acknowledgement to Salome, and I will do so in the pre-opening of this episode of the Cannabis Conference and a Cannabis Hemp Conference and Expo that you'll be joining us at here in Vancouver, May 6th and 7th.
That's right.
And it's going to be featuring cannabis, hemp, many speakers, panelists, discussions, workshops. It's going to be quite an elaborate conference. And you were invited. And Graham, I want to ask, so what about this invitation to come to the Cannabis Hemp Conference was attractive to you? Why did you decide to take us up on this offer?
The reason I decided to take the offer up was because what was in the air was the notion that Canada was about to legalize cannabis, a very courageous and important step. We all know that the emperor wears no clothes, the emperor of the war on drugs.
Yes.
But what was needed was a major nation state to step out of line from all the others and say, yeah, actually, the emperor does wear no clothes. It's ridiculous and absurd for cannabis to be illegal. It's an abuse of adult sovereignty to disallow adults from making these choices over their own bodies. And so I was very encouraged to hear that Canada is legalizing cannabis and that this was a manifesto pledge of your new prime minister.
Yes.
However, what I'm getting back from Canada is a lot of suggestions that this isn't happening, that the promises are not being kept, that legalization is not proceeding as it should proceed, that it isn't actually about the freedom of adults to make sovereign decisions over their own bodies and their own health at all, and that a lot of legislation and control is going to come in with this. So this is disappointing. Obviously we must wait and see what finally happens in Canada. But the reason I'm coming to that conference is because Canada is a government that is apparently about to make cannabis legal. We shall see whether those promises are in fact kept. I sincerely hope that they are kept, because it's time that we had some straight talking and some honesty and some courage in this issue.
100%. I think your arrival at this time where we are in Canada to further encourage this open dialogue and bringing a rather significant voice to it with your platform and just with your experience is critical. And I believe that we have seen signs of which was once a very encouraged and promised act of when this government was coming into trying to be voted in to Parliament. It's been a lot more gray now, and to be honest, I think people are a little concerned of how, if it does come to fruition, how that looks, what their actual motives are behind it. And, they're going to be proposing, apparently, some legislation sometime this spring, potentially April 20th, for this new legislation. But even still, there's been no exact date, and it is concerning, despite this this gentleman, Justin Trudeau, who came off very liberal. And, it's a little concerning. And so I think your timing is
He's a liberal and courageous guy who, spoke truth to power. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be what he's doing here. Well, history will reach its own judgment on this matter in due course. I hope that Trudeau does not demonstrate himself to be just another lying, cowardly, dishonest politician. I hope he'll turn out to be an honest politician and a man of his word and implement what he told the Canadian people he was going to implement.
And I think this is part of the fear that we are experiencing, because he also made a big promise and push towards voting reform as part of his platform. And he has recently reneged on that. And so now I don't see him reneging on the cannabis legalization. However, what's taking so long, and what sort of outcome will that be?
See, there are huge forces at work, big money powers and huge vested interests in keeping things in the very dark, negative, deeply unpleasant and wrong way that they are at the moment. With the status of cannabis illegal, that is putting money in a lot of people's pockets. I'm not just talking about the drug dealers who are making money because of that ridiculous law, but I'm also talking about big pharma and many other vested interests who have an interest in keeping cannabis illegal. They don't want people to take command over their own bodies and their own health. Big Pharma would like to be prescribing us everything and taking these sovereign decisions out of our hands. And I've no doubt that Trudeau has received an enormous amount of pushback from very powerful vested interests. And so it's up to him, really, to decide whether he keeps his promise or not. Yeah,
it absolutely is. And and it's interesting, too, because we're seeing results in states that have legalized, Washington, Colorado, tremendous economic return and tremendous entrepreneurship and things like that. So
and tremendous social return. I mean, really, socially, everything's been really very good in Colorado since Colorado legalized. There were all kinds of suggestions about how it would all go wrong and it would be the beginning of a total catastrophe. Quite the opposite has been true. It's been very successful. It's been a very good revenue earner for the state. And it has opened up an atmosphere of freedom. We human beings need to live in an atmosphere of freedom, especially when it concerns our own bodies and our own consciousness. These politicians always talk about being careful what messages they send. Right now, they're sending a message that they do not respect the sovereignty of adults to make decisions about their own bodies while doing no harm to others. And that's a terrible message to send. That's a message of dictatorship, not of freedom.
And it's complete hypocrisy as well in terms of what, legalized drugs they do allow us to consume, mind-altering drugs. So, we've heard this, and we've you've been beating this drum very loudly for a long time in a really poetic way, I would feel, and very, articulate way. And, so your one of your talks that you'll be doing is called, and maybe you'll work this title, but I think this is what I have here, Negotiations with the Green Goddess, referring to, Mother Mary, if you will, the highs and lows, the gifts and debits of this author's 30-year relationship with cannabis.
Yeah.
So what about your relationship with cannabis? Do you still carry with you today that's propelling you towards obviously coming to Vancouver for this talk, but in general with what you're doing?
Well, first of all, what propels me forwards on this issue isn't actually so much to do with cannabis as such. It's to do with the kind of society that we want to shape in the future. And I believe that that a society that does not allow adults, I repeat myself, to make sovereign decisions over their own bodies and consciousness, so long as they do no harm to others. That is not a kind of society that I want to live in. I don't want to live in a society filled with overwhelming state control, where the state already intrudes and penetrates into so many aspects of our life, but now it's seeking to penetrate into the inner sanctum of our own consciousness and our own decisions about our health. And that's just plain wrong. If we carry on going down that road, none of us will be able to make any sovereign decisions about our own bodies or our own consciousness in the future. So this is an important, fundamental, basic human rights issue, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
Now, my own relationship with cannabis has, well, I'm getting on in years now. I'm 66 years old, and I actually did not experience cannabis apart from a tiny little bit when I was at university. I did not experience cannabis until I was in my 30s, roughly 36 or 37 years old, way back in 1987. That was the first time that I really encountered cannabis, believe it or not. And it really had a very interesting effect on me. I liked it. I enjoyed it. It seemed to me to be harmless. And I felt, rightly or wrongly, I can't prove this, that it helped my creativity. That it's a curious thing that before I encountered cannabis, what I wrote about was entirely current affairs and economics and political journalism.
Right.
After encountering cannabis, my interests began to shift, and I began to take an interest in ancient mysteries, and found myself beginning to walk down the path of research and writing that I'm still walking on today. I don't think, to be honest, that I would have written any of my books of historical mystery, any of my investigations into the mysteries of the past, if I had not had that encounter with cannabis when I was 36 or 37 years old. I think it subtly helped me to shift out of a particularly rigid mindset and move into a broader and more open mindset. And my work benefited enormously as a result. And I'm grateful to cannabis for that, and I always will be. That it is for me. I do not claim that this is the case for everybody, but for me, in my experience, it's been a positive, creative aid, and it's helped me to open doors in my mind that I perhaps otherwise would not have opened. And I think that's a good thing. But it's important to be clear, in terms of my personal relationship with cannabis, that it's not all been sweetness and light. Look, I like cannabis so much that I used to find myself asking, why don't I just be stoned all the time?
Yeah.
After I discovered that I could write under the influence of cannabis. See, when I wrote my book, The Sign and the Seal, A Quest for the Lost Ark of the Covenant, that book was published in 1992. I was smoking cannabis then, but I didn't smoke while I was writing. I would keep it for evenings and weekends. Yeah. Then when I got on to Fingerprints of the Gods, which is the book that I'm best known for, I experimented. I thought, let's see if I can write stoned, and I found that I could actually. So that opened the door, because I work very hard when I'm writing books. I'm very intense, and I typically do 16-hour days, certainly 14 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks on end. So suddenly the door was open for me to be stoned 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And I don't think that that's the right way to go with cannabis. I've realized this subsequently. I didn't realize it at the time, and I got drawn down over a period of years into a very obsessed, rather paranoid, rather suspicious state of mind, which made me unhelpful and not positive as an individual. For example, I used to feel jealousy towards my wife, and I used to take that jealousy out on her in arguments and debates and discussions as though it was real. But in fact, it was all a complete cannabis fantasy. I'm not saying that cannabis makes us paranoid, but what I'm saying is that if you have that tendency within you, cannabis may allow it to peep out.
Yeah, I've kind of referred to it many times as an amplifier.
Yeah, it amplifies anxieties, definitely that relates to feelings of
and anything. I find it can amplify the energy state of my body. If I'm excited, I'll be really excited. If I'm nervous, I'll be very nervous.
I think that's true. What it came to for me by 2011 was that my intense 16-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week relationship with extremely strong strains of cannabis was not helping me. It was not serving me. I was constantly in a state of suspicion and stress, and I needed not to be in that state. And I was making my wife's life uncomfortable. She was unhappy with the way that I was towards her. I had to listen to that. So we went down to Brazil, and I had 5 ayahuasca sessions in Brazil. And I regularly go to Brazil to drink ayahuasca, but these sessions were focused on my cannabis habit. And the message I got from those sessions is you have to stop. You have to stop. Just stop completely. Which, had I been told 2 weeks before I went to Brazil that I was going to get a message that I had to stop cannabis and I was going to listen to that message, I would have laughed out loud. I wouldn't have believed it was possible. But my goodness, those experiences were so strong. I was shown the hurt and pain that I'd caused to my wife with my harsh and unnecessary words. And words can do a lot of damage and cause a lot of pain, And I saw all of that very clearly from her point of view. And the result was that after that 2 weeks in Brazil, those 5 ayahuasca sessions, I came back to England and I quit cannabis completely for 3 years. I just didn't touch it. And you know what? I found lots of myths that I'd created. One of the myths was, I mentioned to you that I think cannabis helped me with my creativity, and I think it does. But one of the myths that I had convinced myself of was that I couldn't write without cannabis. That turned out to be complete nonsense. I could write perfectly well without cannabis. It was just that I enjoyed writing more with cannabis, but nonetheless, I could write and I could function very effectively. And I wrote a number of books during that period. And generally, the feeling that somehow life would not be worth living if I didn't have access to the green goddess, I'd convinced myself of, turned out to be nonsense. And I had a very enjoyable 3 years. Yeah. Towards the end of those 3 years of not using cannabis, I did begin to wonder whether I had taken enough of a break and whether it might be possible to reassociate with the green goddess again, but in a less obsessional way and in a more respectful way. And it happened while I was thinking those thoughts that I went on Joe Rogan's show.
Right. Oh, I saw what happened.
In September 2014. And Joe says to me, well, we're talking about it. And I said, well, I'm beginning to wonder if it might be time to dip my toes back in the water. And he said, well, why don't you start now? And pulled out a joint and we smoked it on air.
Yeah. Well, I think you raise a really important element of cannabis and cannabis relationship, especially with Western culture and a non-traditional way of having a relationship with it, is that it can become if held in an improper relationship, it can become detrimental potentially. Not that it is, but it's highlighting perhaps a feature in yourself, or the relationship just is not in balance. And I personally had this experience as well. I had developed kind of just a mild anxiety around it, if you will, in terms of just getting out of my condo at the time. I was in my grad school, and I was in a new city, so I didn't have a good social network. And I was, using cannabis probably a little too much, a little bit every single day. And I found I was developing this anxiety just to get out and go out and do stuff normally. Took this kind of heroic feat a little bit to charge myself up just to do that. And, on that, I recognized that imbalance. And so I needed to take that break. And currently I am doing that right now as well. And more so because I'm working with other plant medicines that I want to focus on that energy and that consciousness. And I'll see how, and I'll bring cannabis back when I need to, and when I want to.
Well, that's the right relationship with the herb. She should be serving us in some way and helping us. And when the relationship becomes unhelpful and starts to interfere with a positive and nurturing life, then I think we have to reconsider our relationship with cannabis. And all of this would be so much better if we lived in an environment where one could talk openly about these things and where there wasn't this ridiculous climate of fear created by our society, right, threatening to send us to prison, for taking this ancient medicinal plant. It's really completely absurd. But my view very strongly is respect is in order.
Yes.
Cannabis should be respected, and properly respected, she can play a very important and positive part in people's lives and can offer all kinds of areas of healing. But we should always stay in control of that relationship.
Yeah, I often go back to my first experience with cannabis, which I can probably assume a lot of other people, Canadians as well, had that experience. When you're in your teenage years, you're in high school, and you kind of sneak off with your friend, and you try to smoke a joint and try to get high, and you kind of keep it a secret. You got to be undercover. I can only contrast that with an idea of going and sitting with an elder, perhaps, amongst my peers in a ceremonial, ritualistic fashion. How much would that have impacted my relationship with cannabis in a reverent way?
Absolutely. And the first thing that elder might have said, and you might have been willing to listen, was, hold on, don't be in such a hurry. Not necessary to smoke this herb when you're 14 or 16. Wait until you're in your 20s. Wait until you've, done a bit more work in the world and got yourself a bit more solidly grounded. Now, at the moment, when that message is given to teenagers by governments, teenagers rightly don't listen to it because they don't believe anything that governments say, because it's obvious that the governments are not operating in the interests of their citizens in these matters. But if we lived in an environment where cannabis was legal and one could openly discuss it, then wise advice from experienced elders would be listened to. I believe they would be. Hang on, no need to take this as a teenager, because I don't think actually that cannabis is a great thing for teenagers. I would wish to advise teenagers to be patient. Come back to this plant in your 20s. And work with it then when you're a bit more formed as an individual, because you are dealing with a powerful medicine, not because I want to interfere in your life and tell you what to do, but because of my own life experience, I can advise you of this.
Yeah, and I think it's, you speak to also just reestablishing these kind of transition of knowledge between elders to youth and in a respectful form. Like something that I feel and we had a podcast last week with a gentleman on, and we kind of got into this discussion about how institutions at large, authority figures at large have people are losing trust. People don't trust them because they've kind of broken that trust again and again and again. And we need to heal this element of our society somehow. Do you have any kind of comment or thoughts about this?
Well, yes. I mean, trust has to be earned.
Right.
Trust does not come with one's job or one's position. One must behave in a trustworthy way in order to be trusted. And the reason that politicians are broadly not trusted across the world today is because they don't behave in a trustworthy way, because they are dishonest, because they do fudge the edges of things, because they are actually promoting often an ideological program rather than a program meant to help people. Why should we trust these thieves and liars? I don't know.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, we're seeing institutions from governments to academia, corporate institutions, banks. The distrust is just rampant right now in my mind, and this is why this time is so pivotal.
Yeah, it's a really important issue, and it's a sign of how things are changing as people struggle to find new ways to function and work in the world. I mean, it's interesting to me as a writer. 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, the mainstream media could make or break a book. If Professor X or Dr. Y made a pronouncement that was quoted in a newspaper, people would believe that, by and large. Today, it's all changed. And it's changed for the very good reasons that those authority figures have proved themselves to be untrustworthy, whether they are scientists, whether they are politicians, whether they are corporate leaders. They've all proved to be lining their own pockets and dishonestly promoting specific agendas that serve them and their friends, and we simply can't trust them anymore.
Yeah,
this is a big change in the society we live in.
Totally.
And it's a change which feels disturbing and troublesome, but ultimately I think it's going to be a good thing, because it's all about us finding out the truth for ourselves, not relying on experts to tell us what to think, but figuring stuff out, networking, talking to other people, exchanging ideas and views, and formulating our own views in that way. It's not perfect. There are many problems to overcome, but I think that this period of turmoil ultimately is going to be a good thing. I
got a question I thought of this morning. In regards to, we know the government has been doing research with psychedelics and cannabis, for many, many years now, probably back in the 60s and things like that. Now, do you believe that the powers that be, which control the legalization of cannabis and psychedelics, are aware of the effects on consciousness? Do you believe they are? Why or why not?
Well, first of all, amongst the powers that be, as it were, you're going to find the majority of those powers that be, whether we're talking government or corporate or indeed scientists, are what I would call rational materialists. They believe that everything reduces to a material substrate, that consciousness is just an accidental epiphenomenon of brain activity, and that there's no meaning or purpose in life. And of course, when you hold views like that, then you're not particularly interested in the spiritual dimension of things, or even care much about consciousness, and where it might go and what it might mean. But my view is that our consciousness is just the single most important and most precious part of ourselves. Yeah. Everything else is secondary to that. Yeah. And we do not live in a society that nurtures and encourages the expansion and growth of consciousness. We live in a society that aims to shut consciousness down, to make us loyal and obedient producers and consumers who do not rock the boat and keep putting money in the pockets of the rich. That is the way that our society functions at the moment.
Do you believe that is because they're ignorant to the effects?
I think there's a great deal of ignorance to the effects, but if you take some of these hardline drug warriors and politicians and, get them to smoke a joint, they probably have a horrible experience, which would only confirm them in their prejudices, because ultimately the effects of anything really depend on what we bring to the party. And if somebody brings an attitude of hatred and fear and suspicion and anger to the cannabis experience, that's probably what they're going to get.
Right. Intention.
And I think that these individuals, may well convince themselves that they are right. But ultimately what they're doing is they are taking decisions over the lives of others, and that cannot be right.
Right. Yeah, and that's because I always wondered if they're like studying these drugs, and they have in the past, then they would have seen, like, when you have a full mystical, psychedelic, entheogenic experience, it is so shifting. It is so personally paradigm shifting that I would imagine that they would flip their tables. I don't think you can suppress that.
I wonder. I mean, I've suggested that a hardline materialist scientist like Richard Dawkins might benefit from a few sessions of ayahuasca, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It depends what these individuals bring to the experience. They might end up having an absolutely horrific experience, which simply confirms them in their prejudices. It's difficult to know. One thing's for sure, though: research has been going on, and the research clearly has indicated a tremendous therapeutic role for the psychedelics in particular. And of course, we already know the huge medicinal and health benefits of cannabis. Yeah. So they can't be blind to this. They can't be oblivious. But it seems that eyes are deliberately shut on anything that is a positive story, so that they can keep maintaining this negative narrative that we've been hearing endlessly for decades now.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think of the shaman that I've worked with down in Peru. His name is Don Howard out of Spirit Quest Sanctuary, and he describes ayahuasca particularly as the quintessential holistic medicine that can work upon your being on the physical, the psychological, the energetic, and the spiritual. And
I would agree with that. Yeah. I would agree with that. But it doesn't mean that everybody comes out of the ayahuasca experience a better person.
True. Right.
It definitely doesn't. It's important to be honest about this. Ayahuasca is a wonderful medicine. It has transformed my life. It's helped me to see things about myself that I really needed to know. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful for that. But let's not pretend that that is the case everywhere for everyone at all times.
Yeah.
Because it's not. There is a new phenomenon in ayahuasca circles where people, for ayahuasca really to do her work, we have to become vulnerable. We have to lower our shields to allow the medicine to speak to us. And I'm very aware now that there are people who go around ayahuasca groups deliberately inserting themselves into ayahuasca groups because of that vulnerability, because they are able to dominate and take advantage of other people in that situation. I call them psychic vampires. This is happening. Not every shaman is a wonderful, beneficent human being. Far from it. We cannot take any of that for granted. It's why it's very important that anybody going into this area does their own detailed groundwork and research before they commit to a particular retreat or a particular.
That's very true. No, and then the notions of sorcery, as they speak, or brujeria, has been a part of Amazonian shamanism for as long as they've had it. They've been aware of it.
It's a huge issue, particularly around Iquitos, Yes. I mean, there's this war amongst shamans, the healers on one side, the brujos, the sorcerers on the other. And this stuff is real, Yeah. I mean, this stuff is real. It can actually do harm. It can do serious damage. And it needs to be taken seriously. Again, the rational materialist Western mindset shies away from that and says, it's just in their minds. But what do we know? The universe is an incredibly complex place. Shamans are those people who for tens of thousands of years have been negotiating with and dealing with areas of reality that most of us never have access to. We should be careful about the judgments we come to about what shamans are doing. It may be that they know a lot more than we do about the fundamental nature of reality.
Absolutely. I think, science, mainstream science has identified the hard problem of consciousness, yet they don't really utilize these tools that are available to us, these medicines, these chemicals, whatever you want to call them,
for ideological reasons they don't. For ideological reasons they don't use them. And an example I give is Professor David Nutt at Imperial College here in London. You may have heard of David. Yeah. David, some years ago, was appointed by our then Labour government as their drug czar to advise them on the science of drugs. And Labour Party at that time said that reassured the public that its drug policy would be based on science. So David goes and does his scientific work, and he produces a list of harms that different drugs cause. Right. And rightly and properly, he puts alcohol right up at the top, very near the top of that list. And cannabis is far less dangerous and far less harmful in every way than alcohol. For that reason, they fired him. He was sacked from his job. Wow. Which shows that the British government's policy is actually not based on science, doesn't want to hear anything about science if the science disagrees with their ideological perspective. So it's actually an ideological issue, not a scientific issue at all. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I look at where we're at today, and we find certain groups of people, actually the majority, are still in this kind of fundamentalist, materialism, reductionist paradigm. Yeah. And do you?
It's the religion of our age, in technological society. My friend John West calls it the Church of Progress. In technological society, we've kind of abandoned the monotheistic faith, at least many of us have, right. But we could put a new kind of religious faith in science and in the fundamental proposition of materialist science that there is nothing else to reality except matter. Right. That isn't a fact. This materialist reductionism is not a fact. It's a theory. It's a reference frame. We actually don't know anything about the complexity of reality. And to home in on a little bit of it and say that's all there is seems to me a terrible mistake. But people cling on to that with an almost religious fervor and respond to it in the way that religious zealots used to respond defending their particular version of monotheism.
I mean, you've mentioned your age. You're 66 years old. You've been around for longer than most now in different ways. So, when you look at this kind of conundrum that the human race is in, what what brings you to a place of optimism in terms of going forward, to like maybe crack these eggs that are so calcified? How do you crack them open, or do you trust just that the process of life and spirit will do that? Where's your paradigm at with that?
Great social changes for the better don't require everybody in society to be convinced of that social change. What you need is an awake and aware group who realize it was like that with the abolition of slavery, for example. A lot of people felt that slavery was just fine, but it took a group of people to realize that it's not fine at all, and to speak out about that gradually got other people thinking. And what gives me hope is that I see signs all over the world of an awake and aware young people. This is what I see. People are waking up in a way that never happened before. And if I look at the age range from 18 to 30, that is a very awake and aware group at the moment. And I have high hopes for that group, that these are people who are not prepared to put up with the bullshit any longer. These are people who recognize what it means to be human, and what it means to be human is that we are not dictated to in every act and every direction that we take in our lives. We have to be able to make our own mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And the place of the state in doing all of that for us has been the source of many problems. People are not prepared to accept that anymore. I see it in the widespread distrust of authority that we spoke about just now. That widespread distrust of authority is wholly appropriate and correct to the present situation. Of course, we live in a time of turmoil, but I believe that fundamental human goodness will come through, and we will emerge from this, shedding some old structures that no longer serve us and finding new ways to do things. We are all one family. This is what humanity is. This is the dawning realization which the internet has to some extent allowed, that we can today form communities of ideas based on shared ideas and not buying into the old notions of what nationality are you, what color is your skin, what religion do you belong to. Just pure ideas. At the level of ideas, people can communicate and share all around the world through the internet, and that communicating and sharing is what is unpicking the old order.
Yeah, 100%. For myself, I can speak to that with an example. Like, I used to feel very guilty about smoking pot. I felt like I was messing myself up. I felt guilty. I felt ashamed. And then, you know what? I heard Joe Rogan talk about it. I'm like, oh, here's a guy who's successful. He's intelligent. He's doing his thing, and he's empowered by it. And it was just a flip of the coin. For me, I was like, it's okay. And you're not a bad person. It's okay. And you can,
Exactly.
And so it was a huge moment, and brought to me by the decentralization of information via the internet.
This is why the cannabis issue is so important.
Yes.
Because the whole issue of the war on drugs is just a huge error that human society has made for the last 50 years. It's been a terrible mistake. In every possible way, it has made things worse, not better. But the place where the fight is now being held is around cannabis. Cannabis is the center of this issue. Are we going to move to a situation where adults are allowed to make free choices about their own body and their own consciousness while doing no harm to others, or are we not? And that issue is focused around cannabis right now. And I'm encouraged that state by state, the people of America are rolling back the war on drugs. Because make no mistake, rolling back the war on cannabis is a fundamental battle in rolling back that evil and wicked enterprise of the war on drugs as a whole. America, the United States, has been at a government level the dark force generating the war on drugs all around the world. So it's a beautiful thing that the American people at a state-by-state level, mobilizing their own democracy, have been able to roll this back and say, no, we do not accept that you tell us what to do. This is our choice at the state level, and we will make this choice. And wherever that choice has been made, it has produced positive and beneficial results. I mean, how stupid do we have to be not to realize what's going on? There, you know, if the drug warriors were right, then we'd have seen a horrendous situation in all of those states that have legalized cannabis. The opposite is true. It's a very benign and positive situation. And hey, it raises revenues as well.
Right.
What's the problem with this? How stupid do we have to be not to get the message?
Right.
So this is why cannabis matters. That more and more people are going to realize that there's a key issue here that touches on their fundamental rights as adults. And I think we've reached a stage where we don't accept big authority telling us what to think and what to feel and how to medicate ourselves or not, and how to deal with our own bodies, always while doing no harm to others.
Yeah, and that I can see how this rollout of the legalization of cannabis in North America in different forms, you know, is such an empowering action by the people towards all the other injustices that we are not really resonating with as well. Like, this is more than just the cannabis. This is more than just, like you're saying, the sovereignty, the distrust, like all these things, they're kind of all rolled into one. You know,
yeah, it's into what horrible morass. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like people taking back their responsibility as a human being towards their life, because we were kind of stripped of this. We were infantilized. We've been, you know, and brainwashed and through the education platforms to not really think critically and exploringly and encourage that way. We've lost touch with spirit. All these things are all intertwined in a lot of ways.
They're all connected, and just as we find ourselves in a situation of, in many ways, of extreme pressure and unpleasantness at the moment for any cannabis smoker or consumer of edibles or whatever form, or vapor or whatever form we take it in. It's a really very unpleasant situation to know that every day you are putting yourself and your family in jeopardy because of the law, because the law can come in and just fuck up your life, completely and utterly ruin your life because of this. And it's just a brilliant thing that the people of America, and now I hope the people of Canada, are saying enough of that.
Yes.
This is a totally insane response to somebody exploring their own consciousness or medicating themselves with cannabis. To throw that person in prison is just absurd. And we shouldn't even be thinking of doing it. Obviously, we live in an insane society, and it's worth remembering that the drug warriors, the ones who want to keep on imprisoning people for smoking cannabis, are the very same people who are responsible for the huge mess that we live in the world, who've made the negative, vile, wrong political decisions, who've invaded other people's countries, you know, who've empowered the wealthy and disempowered the poor in every possible way. It's the same folk, you know, who are the drug warriors and who are responsible for the mess the world is in now.
Yeah, no, well said. You know, I look back on your work of your career and how they've kind of, you know, you can see a red thread through them all in a very interesting way, probably not knowing to you at the time, but you can totally see it on the way back. Like, I'm really curious as to what you're working on now, or do you have anything projected on that future line in the next couple years to come? What are you working on?
My project has been to recover forgotten aspects of the human past. That's been my project. I feel that part of the reason why we're so broken in many ways today, why we need to wake up, is because we are a species with amnesia, because we don't have a clear recollection of our past. And again, our past has been hijacked by the experts, you know, Professor X and Dr. Y, as I call them, the historians, the archaeologists, the so-called experts on our past. They are the ones who present our past to us and tell us what to think about it. And I don't like that. I think I don't want prepackaged answers. I want to explore and investigate for myself. So that's really what I'm best known for. My best known book, undoubtedly, Fingerprints of the Gods, which considers the possibility that there was an advanced civilization on the Earth during the last ice age, which coexisted with hunter-gatherers who were also present on the Earth at that time. And that, by the way, is the situation today. We have an advanced technological civilization, but we also have hunter-gatherer cultures in the Amazon or in Namibia, for example. And in some cases, those hunter-gatherers don't even know that we exist.
Yeah.
But I was arguing that we've lost part of the human story. We've lost a whole chapter. We've lost a whole episode. And I've just continued to work away at that theme and bring new evidence and new information to bear on it. I published Magicians of the Gods in 2015 with an update in 2016. That is taking the whole fingerprints arguments. But there's been 20 years of new science, incredible discoveries, incredible issues that change the way we look at our past and really add strongly to the notion of a forgotten episode. And what I'm working on now is a book about ancient North America, definitely including Canada, and the whole story of the peopling of the Americas. Is now in turmoil. There was a long period where there was an academic consensus view that rigidly maintained and defended against anybody who suggested otherwise. But for a very long time, it was the view that there had been no human beings in America before about 13,500 years ago. That view has completely gone out of the window now. I mean, for a long time, people who opposed that view suffered a great deal of attacks and unpleasantness from other scientists. But now the things have changed. With new archaeological discoveries and new DNA work, we know that the Americas have been populated for tens of thousands of years. And therefore, archaeology actually doesn't have a clue what human beings were doing in the Americas prior to 13,500 years ago, because they've only just discovered that actually there were human beings here then. So I think this is an important time to write a book about the ancient Americas, about the peopling of the Americas, and about the giant cataclysm that North America suffered 12,800 years ago. In fact, between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, North America was undoubtedly the epicenter of a global cataclysm that geologists refer to as the Younger Dryas. But that cataclysm was worldwide in its effects. It caused extinctions all around the world, but it was most focused in North America. And I suspect that part of the reason that archaeology in North America has been thin before 13,500 years ago is because those events 12,800 years ago wiped away most of the traces of what had existed before. And it's this that I'm seeking to recover and to put before the reader in a new book.
That's really interesting. So on your preliminary kind of
by the way, a Canadian archaeologist named Cinq-Mars has been very important in his excavations of the Bluefish Caves. Okay. He was arguing for decades that the Bluefish Caves were evidence of human presence in Canada 25,000 or 30,000 years ago. And he suffered tremendous attacks on his name and his reputation from his colleagues. But now they all recognize he was right. And the Smithsonian Magazine just published a piece lauding and praising him for sticking his neck out and risking the ire of his colleagues for so long. And all along, he was right.
Wow. So he's found evidence of human remains in North America dating back 25,000 years?
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow, that's...
And it's not new. I mean, he's been on that excavation since the 1970s. It was just that the rest of his colleagues ignored it completely. But it's often the case with paradigms and paradigm shift that an old paradigm will stick long past the time when it was any use to anybody. And it takes an accumulation of contradictory evidence. That evidence has to build up and build up and build up and build up to a point where finally all of the adherents of the old paradigm just give up and say, no, we can't defend this anymore. Right. Something else must have been going on. So it's great to live in a time of shifting paradigms.
Yes.
When we open our minds to all kinds of possibilities that we didn't even dare to think about before.
So to what level at this point in time, I know there's probably lots of research for you to comb through, but what are you envisioning that the level of sophistication potentially this society was at?
I think we're dealing with a lost civilization that was in some ways as technically advanced as our own, but in other ways not. I think it was very different from our own. Our society has gone down the path of mechanical advantage. That's what we're very good at, engineering solutions, material things. But in the process, I suspect we've allowed faculties of the human mind to lapse. Faculties like telekinesis, for example, the ability to move objects with the mind, or telepathy. Now, most mainstream materialist reductionist scientists will just scoff at such notions and say that they're not real, they don't exist. But the anecdotal evidence is very strong that this is an innate human faculty. It's just not an innate human faculty that our society has encouraged for the last couple of thousand years. And I suspect if we go back to the lost civilization, we're looking at a civilization that used the powers of the human mind much more than we do, and that had other ways of manipulating matter. So what I always say is, in looking at the past, let us not imagine that the past is a mirror. Let's not look for ourselves in the past. Let's treat the past as a window through which we look through and allow it to speak for itself. All too often, we're projecting ourselves on the past. For example, in North America, there's a particular lobby of scientists who claim that the megafauna, the woolly mammoths, the rhinos, and so on and so forth, became extinct because of overhunting. It's called the overkill hypothesis. But actually, I think what they're doing is projecting the behavior of our society onto the past. Our society is in the business of overkill. Look at the slaughter of the buffaloes in the 19th century in North America, done entirely by incomers. The Native American Indians didn't slaughter the buffalo in that way. As a matter of fact, hunter-gatherer peoples respect animal life. They never take more than they need. And I don't believe they took more than they needed 13,000 years ago either. So we need another way to explain those extinctions, and the evidence for a gigantic cataclysm, very satisfactorily provides the answer to that.
Yeah, you're right. That cultural behavior that we see out of indigenous populations, they had this greater understanding of the homeostasis and balance of Earth and our relationship to it. So that doesn't add up.
The Earth to the cosmos.
Right.
Our relationship to the Earth and to the cosmos.
Right.
Deep, filled with deep respect and a sense of belonging and gratitude for having been given this opportunity to be born in a human body. That was the Native American way. Yeah. And that is quite the opposite of the way of our industrialized technological society, which is about raping the earth and stealing from the earth and slaughtering animal species and just taking everything and turning it into produce.
Right.
That is the ethic of our society. And then we look at the past, we see extinctions of animal species, and we project ourselves into that. We say, oh, they must have been killed by human beings. Bad idea. This does not make sense. I don't know any hunter-gatherer people who hunt animals to extinction. It's us who do that.
Right. Yeah. I think of, some people might say, well, why is this applicable now? Or how is it applicable now? But I look at what potential of ourselves as a human species are we not even aware of? And I look at people. Have you heard of Wim Hof?
Yes, I have.
So his name's floating around kind of the podcast circles for sure, right? The Iceman. So he's discovering, through just unknown abilities to control the autonomic nervous system with his mind and his intention and his will almost, right? And so it's just like when you live in a different relationship with the cosmos, with the earth, with spirit, like what form of a society actually, fruits out of that? And I think you're right. Like they might be super sophisticated, but they might not go and treasure like the things that we treasure, these material things. Like their whole paradigm is different. So they're not going to channel their energy towards, building a new HD camera or something. You know what I mean? Like those sorts of technologies. And
because we don't find the HD camera in the archaeological strata, we think there's nothing there. We're not looking in the right places or in the right way. And when you do that, it becomes very clear that we have lost a big episode of the human story. I mean, and there are technological remains. I mean, something that I frequently cite is the ancient maps that have come down to us that show the world as it looked during the last ice age, that incorporate precise longitudes, which is really quite a technological feat. And that tells us that somebody was mapping the world back in the Ice Age and was doing so with a level of technology that perhaps it's not 21st century. Our culture was capable of getting accurate longitudes in the late 18th century, but at least as advanced as that.
Yeah. No, and looking at even ourselves, and like you mentioned, potentially telepathy and telekinesis, like I mean, you're right. And our paradigm doesn't accept that right now.
It just doesn't accept that. And our paradigm is so invested, again, in material things, right. Machinery. We see a technical or an engineering problem. And these days, we just automatically think machinery. And all other ways to solve that problem, which other human societies might have achieved in the past, are just forgotten and abandoned. And this is a mistake. We're limiting ourselves.
Yeah, I look at this as like, quite often we're chronically externally oriented. And a lot of this stuff can be kind of reevaluated when you start to bring your awareness internal. You go internal. And I'm really curious for you, do you have any personal exercises or activities that you do to bring your awareness internal and to just go within, and what that would be?
For me, it's writing. Oh. That's what writing is a meditation for me. I drift into the writing and lose all sense of everything else. It is going into an inner world, and it's a meditative exercise for me. Very, very definitely.
Interesting. So, are you constantly writing even today? Like, what does your days look like these days?
At the moment, I'm mainly reading. I'm researching. It's important that I have in front of me the very latest academic knowledge on this issue, both knowledge that is favorable to my case and knowledge that perhaps is unfavorable to my case. I have to know it in all. I have to learn a lot. I have to make contact with lots of academics and speak to them about the work that's being done on the ground. I need to be completely familiar with the mainstream story if I am going to give an alternative story. And that's what I'm in the process of doing right now.
Do you get any resistance when you reach out to these different academics? Now knowing, because your name's out there, right? You're kind of this anarchist researcher a little bit.
I'm known amongst archaeologists. A lot of archaeologists just walk the other way and won't even speak to me. But more and more of them are willing to speak, actually. And I've met a number of archaeologists in the last 3 or 4 years who are willing to engage with me and who I've had fruitful discussions with, which have been beneficial to me and perhaps in some small way beneficial to them as well. And I'm finding the same with scientists working in the area of cosmic impacts and the cataclysm that occurred 12,800 years ago. There's a lot of open dialogue there as well.
Yeah, no, that's
so I do think things are shifting. They are definitely changing in a positive way.
Fantastic. Well, it seems like you have a lot of still enthusiasm and vigor and motivation towards all stuff. So I'm really excited for that. And I know everyone here in Vancouver is very excited to have you come and join us at the Cannabis Hemp Conference and Expo, May 6th and 7th. You'll be speaking both days.
Great event.
Yes.
It's going to be a really good event.
Yes, it will be. And, you got two talks you're giving, one on each day. So I encourage people to get on those early bird tickets. I know they're available at cannabishempconference.com. So please don't miss out on this opportunity. I know I was at your, last time you were in Vancouver, it was for the Magicians of the Gods, and you sold out a church. It was awesome.
True. Yes.
It was packed. People were crammed at the door and standing in the back of it and lined up for hours to talk with you afterwards. So,
remember, that's good. Well, I think this is going to be a great conference, and I'm there for attendees at the conference. I'm very happy to chat and exchange views with anybody about anything.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Graham, and it's grahamhancock.com. That will connect you with all his books, all his social media platforms. Yes. That's the hub for sure.
It is.
And Graham, thank you so much for joining me with this conversation. It's a for lack of a better term, it's a bucket list check for me. I'm really honored to have this opportunity with you. So I really appreciate it.
I've enjoyed our chat. Very nice to talk to you.
All right. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you.